Here is Ticky Fullerton on Your Money.
Hello there, I'm Ticky Fullerton. Every night bringing you a full hour of the very best in business coverage across the nation and internationally, especially where business and politics meet. Well, coming up, he's the man with the job of deciding what to do with Kenneth Haynes' Banking Royal Commission recommendations, decisions that balance accountability of banks and their bosses with keeping our financial system safe and strong. Treasurer Josh Frydenberg joins me shortly.
You know, we've probably had 10 years of failure on energy policy.
Great month for Captain of Industry Richard Goyder. The former Wesfarmers CEO steps into the role of chairman at Qantas shortly. He's now top of the top floor with 2 more chairs at Woodside and the AFL Commission. And a West Coast Eagles win under his belt over the weekend. Got to be happy with that. Our interview with Richard Goyder on the way. And we'll head live to London, where Brexit tensions are reaching new levels of madness. Prime Minister May desperately hanging on to her Chequers plan, which former Foreign Minister Boris Johnson labels deranged, and another former British Prime Minister now calling for a second referendum on Brexit. Chaos there. Well, we here have had a weekend to digest Kenneth Haynes' interim Royal Commission report, the investigation that has lifted the lid on some very ugly business practices in banking and finance. Bank shares, when the report dropped on Friday afternoon, went up 2 to 3%. I wonder what Ken Haynes made of that. Why the jump? Apparently, a collective sigh of relief that the Commissioner is persuaded a truckload of new regulation is not the answer. Current laws are tough enough, it's just that banks don't stick to them, and regulators, in particular ASIC, has been asleep at the wheel. But I wonder, this interim report actually gives very little away on what the final report will look like. It also only covers the first 4 sessions. It doesn't touch the appalling behaviour of fee gouging with the retail funds, nor the insurance failures. In essence, the interim report raises a litany of questions, remarkably similar to those which silks like Rowena, Shock and Awe threw up in their sum-ups for Kenneth Haynes. For example, should financial product managers be permitted to provide financial advice? Or should any part of the remuneration of financial advisors be dependent on the value or volume of sales? A few conflicts there, maybe. And let's not forget, everything is viewed through the prism of a federal election now. Banks should be concerned that the collective relief from the interim report is not taken as collective smugness, because there's Kenneth Haynes' open disdain for behaviour in individual cases. That's there for all of us to see. Labour is already running an attack ad on the Prime Minister.
Scott Morrison voted against the Banking Royal Commission 26 times.
Well, government needs to neutralise this and may even double down when it comes to recommendations, as it has with the breakup powers given to Rod Sims in energy. And what should we make of Kenneth Haynes' frustration with ASIC? I can't remember how many times I and many other journalists asked ASIC commissioners in recent years why enforceable undertakings were appropriate given the penalties being dished out to banks in other markets. We all saw industry capture there, didn't we? But in its defence, ASIC was getting precious little support from the government. As recently as the last budget, millions of dollars were taken out of ASIC before an enlightened government returned it with interest. Secondly, some of the laws under which ASIC was working were an ass, frankly. ASIC's recent shocking review into breach reporting by banks showed that while the banks took over 5 years to right wrongs with some customers, 5 years, that the penalty, the maximum financial penalty available to ASIC was about 60 grand. And the hurdle that the regulator had to clear to get criminal charges was close to impossible. The significant breach that needed to be proved was entirely subjective. Well, maybe ASIC should have squealed earlier, but that will now change. Make no mistake, Kenneth Haynes and his legal eagles have got all this mapped out from a nest high above the banking landscape. They collected all the documents first, they knew exactly which scalps they wanted, they went for them and not for others. Just look at the walk in the park they gave Aussie Super's chief Ian Silk. But they had clearly decided that industry super funds' governance failures paled against the gouging of retail super funds. The fox in the hen house, as I've said before, was right, and these legal eagles set about the theatre then to pull the Australian psyche with them. And remember too, the Royal Commission has kept its powder dry on what criminal charges, if any, it will be recommending. Banks are off considerably today. Have a look. A bit of perspective setting in, perhaps. Well, let's start off with Richard Goyder. He's a man wearing many hats. The former Wesfarmers chief executive is now the chairman of the AFL Commission, the chairman of Woodside Petroleum, Australia's biggest sole gas company, and has most recently been announced as the incoming Qantas chairman. Makes him one of the top captains of industry with a view into many parts of the economy. So what does he have to say about the current state of affairs? I caught up with Richard Goyder for a wide-ranging interview, starting, of course, with the footy. Richard Goyder, great to talk to you. Now, what a game on Saturday. I mean, surely even the Prime Minister must have seen AFL as a thing of beauty then?
I think he did. Ticky, yeah, great to be with you. The Commission wanted a close game and we got it. An amazing game, amazing atmosphere. And the
boys from the West came through.
Yeah, and the Prime Minister enjoyed it, as did everyone else. I think it was a terrific day and a great win to West Coast.
OK, great win for you as well, obviously, personally, as chair of the Commission. Now, what do you want to actually do during your term? Football is now a central part of communities across the country and increasingly important. And so what do we want to achieve? We want to make football, the most spectacular game, supported by many, part of community. And I wouldn't, with my background, you wouldn't be surprised to know that I want to make sure we've got a balance sheet as well. Right. So what does that involve? Well, we've got, in terms of the balance sheet, we now own Etihad Stadium. We've got a terrific joint venture coming with the Victorian Government around the Docklands precinct. And there's an opportunity to make the AFL balance sheet stronger and indeed our 18 clubs stronger. And through that, more community work and through that, the state competition stronger and community football, as I said, a really important part of our society. Richard, you are now a very senior member of the top floor. You chair Woodside and you're taking on the chair of Qantas. Just on the gas side, very exciting time for Woodside with its growth strategy now. I'm wondering what you think, though, about some of the policies that have come in, and particularly this default, effectively a cap on retail prices, how that might feed back into the gas sector more broadly, and the gas intervention mechanism. What do you think of these taken together? Yeah, so it is exciting times for Woodside, Ticky, because we've got significant projects near term and long term and big investment, and that's good for the company, if we deliver well for our shareholders, but also for the community. More broadly, from a national point of view, we've probably had 10 years of failure on energy policy. And as a user, I know what business wants. Business wants reliability and efficient pricing and competitive pricing. And you would think we could get that in a country which has an abundance of energy. And from an investment point of view, I know that we want certainty in terms of what the criteria will be in terms of emissions and the regulations around being an investor in energy. So we've got to sort that out. Angus Taylor's a smart person. Hopefully he can get that sorted so that we can... But are you worried about this pressure down on electricity prices? They've ditched the NEG. Emissions don't seem to be the main game. It's pressure on all members, businesses in the energy producing industry to keep those prices down, potentially at all costs. We've got an election campaign too. Yeah, well, that's the issue, Ticky. I think we're mixing the short-term imperative of reducing household energy bills with the long-term imperative of getting businesses to invest so that you get more supply. And, Economics 101 would say that if you get more supply, then that meets or exceeds demand, then prices will come down. So we've got to get the supply side right. But how does this play out? For example, I mean, your role as a former chair of the B20, when you look internationally at how international investors are looking at this country, does it worry you, the sort of energy policies we're running with at the moment? Yeah, I think, as I said, I think we've had a failure in energy policies for the last decade, Ticky, and that, it's a significant part of an economy, and so that is a concern. I expect everyone knows that we've got to sort this out. The current government, indeed the Parliament, and we need to get it sorted so that we can get the investment in that
efficient sector, reliability, and in a way that is sustainable as well.
Do we need a Royal Commission into energy, as some have called for, in order to sort this out?
I mean, the Royal Commissions have a purpose, and clearly with what has come out last week in the banking side of things, then there's been a need to look at what's going on there. I think energy is simpler. I think energy, let's get the policies right. I don't think we need a Royal Commission for that. We don't need to make the legal sector wealthy. We need to make the energy sector efficient and investing for the long term.
So how do we get it right?
It's getting the policy settings right, and there's generally been pretty strong argument that a lot of the policies in the NEG were the right sort of policies. We've just got to get the Parliament over the line and get these things in place, and then not change them. What investors dislike, Ticky, is the rules changing. That's what people internationally say. Well, there's too much of a worry in Australia if you change your policies, if we're investing in the long run. The sort of projects that Woodside are investing in are decades of production and multiple billions of dollars of upfront investment.
OK. When you look at, though, what's come out, as you say, of the Royal Commission into the financial sector, the interim report that's occurred now, the banks actually, the share prices all went up last week on the news. Now, I would have thought, looking at the interim report, Kenneth Hayne merely raised a lot of questions, keeping his powder dry on final recommendations. You obviously know all the bank chairs and many people on the boards of banks very well. How do you think they should be looking at the final report and recommendations?
Well, far be it for me to offer advice, but the thing about banking is that liquidity into the economy is the grease that makes the engine go, the oil that makes the engine go. So I think the market reaction is more to do with the fact that the issues raised are as much behavioural as they are regulatory, and we've got to make sure, I think, that whatever comes out of this Royal Commission, whatever recommendations come, that we don't dry up that liquidity, that engine oil, because that's an incredibly important part of the domestic and international economy.
But you're saying you can't regulate behaviour?
Clearly there's behavioural issues, and none of us is perfect on that front, and as boards and as executives, the expectations of community are high, and they should be, and we, I think, have all got to do better on that front. Do
you think this combination of Royal Commissions, regulation, intervention across, we've had the bank levy, of course, as well, as I say, an election campaign, what is this doing to animal spirits in this country?
Well, we've got to make sure that it doesn't diminish the appetite for people to have a go. To do that in a sustainable way, to do that in a proper way with the right behaviour. But we do want organisations taking risks, because without that we won't get growth. And we live in the most wonderful country, and we've got 26, 27 years of uninterrupted economic growth. And with that comes significant benefits that we're all enjoying. Now, we've got challenges near term and long term, but we've got to make sure that we don't regulate our way to into low growth, into an outcome that none of us want. And regulations will never stop poor behaviour. It's up to chief executives and boards to set a tone of companies that doesn't accept poor behaviour, where integrity is really important to an organisation, and that the long term is more important than the short term as well.
Richard, what about the relationship between big business and the government of the day? I mean, the BCA's relationship with the government in particular. Now, obviously, there's the signature policy of company tax cuts. That's been ditched. We had the bank levy, as I say, come in. There's been a lot of quite populist policy now. What's happened to the relationship between the government and big business, and how can it be improved?
I think in terms of the BCI, I think Jennifer Westacott does a fantastic job, Ticky. Business clearly has an agenda, and sometimes that can be different to that of government. But in the long run, we're all after a growing economy. We're all after increasing the size of the pie and ensuring that the community benefits as a consequence of that. And one thing I know is that the government of the day needs businesses to invest, needs business to take risk, needs businesses to be developing and recruiting great people and employing more people.
Yes.
So, I think it is imperative that there's a good relationship between businesses, large and small, and government. We should be able to have our differences and discuss and debate those. I think the tax policy is a failure of the Parliament, and long run, I think that hurts us. We shouldn't be having a two-tier tax system for corporates in this country, and we should have a far more competitive tax system than we've got. And interestingly, both sides of politics say that's required. Well, let's get on and do it.
Yeah. Are there any things that particularly concern you, given in the election campaign, Labor's position, for example, on franking credits? What might happen with a PRRT?
Yeah, I'm more concerned that we don't end up with short-term policies that impact long-term investment and the economy long run. And you've talked about the regulatory arrangements and anything that causes...
So this default pricing on the electricity, the retail electricity side, would that be an example?
There's plenty of examples. Ticky, and I don't want to get into the specifics on too many of these because I'll let others pursue that case. But what we can't do is have an environment that means businesses think twice about investing. We want businesses to invest. You get through that, you get productivity growth, you get growth in wages, and an economy growing. And as I said, we can't take for granted what we've had. We're in an amazing place. We've got huge opportunities because we've got growth economies nearby, and not just the resources sector, but food and services in this country. And we've got a highly educated population, a great health system.
And
we've
indeed,
got so many good things.
And indeed airlines, Richard, and you're just taking over as chair of Qantas, as I say, from Lee Clifford. Now, he had quite a ride, both down and then up. Warren Buffett obviously feels it's safe enough to look at airlines for the longer term. For ordinary people, do you think the days of the real crises in airlines, as airline investments, are over? Can you manage an airline so that doesn't happen?
Well, I think, the combination of Lee Clifford and Alan Joyce, without taking away from the board or executives, has been an extraordinary combination. And the turnaround in Qantas is a great credit to Lee and Alan. And again, taking a long-term view and doing the basics right. And I think as a consequence of that, Qantas is in very good shape and able to mitigate, to a degree, higher oil prices and the like, and an exciting future because there's, hub-busting aircraft coming. There's some very exciting things for Qantas on the way. And if you look at the global aviation industry, with the global economy in reasonable growth place at the moment, in countries like China, significant investment going into aircraft.
So it's all right for mums and dads to invest?
Well, we'll do our best to ensure that's the case. There's always ups and downs in businesses. Some people say I'm perfectly hedged with Woodside and Qantas, but
indeed.
Hopefully we can, with superior management in both businesses, we can do better than that.
All right. Well, look, congratulations again on the weekend. I should just ask you, as a Dockers supporter, is there any issue about where Woodside sponsorship is going to go? There's a bit of speculation that it might flick to the Eagles.
I'll leave that to Peter and his team. And West Australia will be celebrating, but the Collingwood Magpies and Eddie Maguire and his team should be pretty proud of what they've achieved, as should all the AFL clubs, Ticky.
All right, Richard Goyder, thank you so much for joining us on our first day at Your Money.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Yeah, you'd be pretty sore, Eddie Maguire. Anyway, after the break, going to the UK, we'll get the latest on the madness of Brexit with Jasper Lawler from London Capital Group.
You're watching Ticky on Your Money. Now, back to Ticky.
Yes, welcome back. We're moving to international news now. And new data shows British companies cutting their investment in the second quarter of 2018 in a fresh blow to Prime Minister Theresa May as she heads to a ruling party conference that many see as make or break for her Brexit plans. There's just 6 months left to negotiate a deal on Britain's split from the EU, and Ms May is calling on her party to back the Brexit plan, which one senior figure described as deranged. For more, I'm joined from London's capital by Jasper Lawler. Jasper, yes, no, that the senior person, of course, with the deranged label is, of course, Boris Johnson, the former Foreign Secretary. Now, I thought Prime Minister May had already had her make or break moment on her Chequers deal.
Well, good morning, Ticky. Plenty of make-or-break moments for Theresa May. She's made all of them up to date, but you do feel that a break is around the corner always. Yes, Boris Johnson obviously causing trouble before this Conservative Party conference. It's interesting. This is normally of vague interest to Brits to see these conferences. Obviously, these parties are supposed to lay out their plans for what they would do for Britain, but now increasingly of interest to the EU as well. And I read one EU source said, you know, how come the Brits became so volatile? What happened to the stiff upper lip? I suppose politics has become very interesting in the UK because of Brexit. Boris Johnson more recently, and as it pertains to Brexit, has said that Theresa May told him that the backstop on the Irish border was just something to deflect the EU negotiations falling off a cliff. So that's quite interesting. Obviously, he's stirring the pot here, and it's not going to be well received in the EU, comments like that. So probably more to come of those.
Yeah, stirring the pot, as you say, you get leading up to the Tory party conference, but we've just had the Labour conference where Jeremy Corbyn has been talking up, no doubt, the idea of a second referendum as well. Now, I read one comment from someone in the city who said that actually a Jeremy Corbyn prime ministership is as scary for the city as Brexit is.
Absolutely, I would go along with that. I would welcome, although I'm not personally in favour of having a second referendum, but I welcome at least the Labour Party offering some form of opposition, some kind of different ideas to what the Tory party are doing. That's been lacking so far. But if you listen to some of the other ideas put out there, for example, a maximum cap on wages in the private sector, and the remaining would be used to pay for the NHS. Some of these kinds of ideas, you know, large parts of society would welcome that, but that would frighten the city to death. And you would imagine if the Labour Party came in and ideas like that were still on the table, you'd see all sorts of British asset prices falling fairly rapidly, I think. So I think it's fair to say a Labour Party government with the current figures in control is more worrying than Brexit for the city.
And a bit of capital flight as well, no doubt. But the other thing was that the other people calling for a second referendum include a former Prime Minister, John Major, who actually previously had, I think, said, oh, well, once we have this vote, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, increasingly, obviously, as we reach the finishing line here, many people getting nervous that not any kind of deal is going to get done, or if there is a deal on the table, maybe we get frightened into voting for something that's not much good. And you can obviously make a fairly decent democratic argument here that the British people should be allowed to vote on what's on the table. Is this the Brexit they wanted when they voted for it, etc. So plenty of people obviously getting involved and making that opinion heard, and I still personally don't think that's going to happen, particularly while Theresa May's in charge. She said that she's a second Brexit referendum is not on the table, but whether she remains in charge is a big open question.
Right, OK. So what else is moving markets at the moment? I noticed that we've got a new deal between the US and Mexico and Canada. It's not quite as catchy as NAFTA, the USMCA, I think it's called. But does that mean with you know, this rush of protectionism around the world, the risk is pulling back now?
Well, absolutely. So obviously Donald Trump was not a big fan of NAFTA, so wanted to rename this new trilateral trade agreement between the three countries. It apparently is a much better deal for the US, still better for Canada and Mexico to be involved in some kind of deal, so everyone claiming a victory here. But I think it goes to show that Donald Trump is not necessarily looking for a trade war on all fronts, which is something I think some particularly emerging markets were pricing in. And so you're seeing a bit of a rebound in equities, even in Europe here, where obviously that's another potential front for a trade war, particularly on automobiles. You know, it's welcome that maybe this trade war, if there is going to be one, is just bilateral. Essentially, the US and China doesn't necessarily mean it's the US and every part of the world. So that, as you can take it, is good news.
Right, the art of the deal. Jasper Lawler, thank you very much for joining us there. Now, after the break, where to now? Following the Hain interim report, Treasurer Josh Frydenberg is standing by. I'll have him for you next.
This is Ticky on Your Money, covering the big business stories.
Welcome back. We're moving to a bit of politics now, and former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull has called former colleagues Tony Abbott and Kevin Rudd miserable ghosts in a leaked audio. Mr Turnbull was recorded while speaking to a group of young leaders in New York last Friday. The former PM also called the leadership spill crazy.
For reasons that they've not been able to explain, you know, there was an element of the party and of the media that wanted to blow the government up, and they did. And because they didn't get their guy up, they ended up with ScoMo. But then, when you stop being Prime Minister, that's it. There's no way I'm going to be hanging around like an embittered Kevin Rudd or Tony Abbott. No, well, seriously, I mean, these people, what are they? They're sort of like miserable ghosts.
Somebody's always listening, aren't they? Well, for more on this story, Sky News political reporter Annalise Nielsen joins me live from Canberra. Annalise, what on earth's been the reaction here to this leak?
Well, I think people have just been fairly bewildered. It's quite extraordinary, not only just that what he said about having a go at his former colleagues and former prime ministers as well, but just the fact that it was leaked while he's ostensibly trying to keep out of the fray of politics. And so it has just sparked a whole bunch of speculation today about exactly how it got out. But it was an extraordinary thing as well to be saying that he thinks these former prime ministers were acting like miserable ghosts. Now, there was a lot of discussion today about the tweet, about the recording itself, where he said the word embittered, that they were really embittered in the way they acted after they were ousted and they hung around Parliament, when he thinks they should have just gone out gracefully and left Parliament like he did. Yeah. So the original speculation was around that word embittered, because we all thought he was saying lipid, and then we thought he was saying limpid. So those, well, the lipid is a kind of, we've all had some science lessons today. So lipid is a kind of indissoluble fat that clogs things. And then limpet is a kind of mollusk that clings onto a boat and is crusty and it's really hard to get rid of. And so both actually would have worked, but he did clarify that he meant embittered. That's what Mr Turnbull took to Twitter to clarify. But he didn't choose to clarify any of his other comments. He didn't choose to say that he was taken out of context, which is hard to do when there is a recording. But that was quite interesting. And then now we have had Mr Rudd weigh in. It has taken him quite a while to weigh in on this conversation. Usually he is quick to make an observation, but he said that he doesn't think he's been acting like a miserable ghost at all. He made the point that he moved to New York 5 years ago, but he wasn't quite making the observation about his movements in Parliament before his move to New York, when he ousted another Prime Minister as well. So he chose to leave that one off the record, but he did invite Malcolm over for a cuppa, because he's over in New York as well. We've got Mr Turnbull there, Mr Gillard's there right now, we understand. And so if you've ever had any doubt that politicians are getting paid enough, if they can all exile themselves to New York and be unemployed there, that's a pretty good indicator.
Too right. Annalise, great to have your views. Thanks so much. Annalise Nielsen there. Well, a big grand finals weekend behind us now, as we all know, surely. And if anyone was in any doubt, we're in election mode as well. Here was the Prime Minister today calling for underdog status and using his Saturday AFL, not NRL, AFL grand final experience at the MCG.
It says something, doesn't it? You can be behind in the first quarter by a fair way, but what matters is where you are when the siren sounds. And even if that means you've got to put in a pretty amazing kick from the right along on the boundary line there. That was an amazing kick, I've got to say. I mean, West Coast missed a few that they probably should have got a lot easier, but to kick that one from that boundary was an extraordinary effort. So it just goes to show, you know, when you have someone who's in front of you and they think they've got it all sewn up, you never know, do you?
Well, he jumped the codes pretty comfortably there. The Prime Minister's now right-hand man, though, Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, being a Victorian, was also at the G for the grand final. He barracks for Carlton, and you need a lot of hope and dreams to be a Blues backer these days. But anyway, appointed in the shake-up of the new Morrison ministry, Josh Frydenberg is really taking the lion's share of responsibilities on the economic side, including the federal budget, economic fiscal policy, taxation, super, and the Hayne Royal Commission, of course, not to mention major foreign investment and oversight of the regulators. Well, a lot of talk around the Royal Commission after Friday's release of Commissioner Kenneth Hayne's interim report, with the big banks accused of greed-driven misconduct. Treasurer Josh Frydenberg joins me now live from the Commonwealth offices in Melbourne. Treasurer, welcome there. Thank you very much for joining us on our first day outing of Your Money.
Good afternoon, Ticky. Nice to be with you.
All right. Well, I know you've been out and about on the Royal Commission today in that interim report. Were you surprised that the bank shares went up so strongly on Friday? I mean, it didn't even include what Commissioner Hayne thought about super or insurance. It was just lending and financial advice. And the banks all seemed pretty happy with the fact that there were not likely to be any major new regulation.
Well, they must have had pretty low expectations as to what was in the report, because I think it was a frank and scathing assessment of the conduct and the culture and the compliance of the sector, and Commissioner Hayne sent a very strong message that the status quo is not good enough. And while he was careful about the need for more regulation, because we already have a complex regulatory environment, he was very clear that more enforcement and better enforcement needs to take place. And he directed, as you know, his attention at ASIC in respect to the way they preferred negotiation over litigation.
Well, a lot of blame put onto ASIC and indeed APRA. Do you think ASIC and APRA suffered from what is called industry capture at all?
Well, certainly they have been close to industry, and from what has come through in the report, it's clear that perhaps too close. Because what we know is that ASIC has had a very high success rate with the cases that they've taken through the courts, more than a 90% success rate, but they preferred to negotiate or to put in place infringement notices or to issue a press release rather than take the necessary next step, which is to prosecute. And that is something that they no doubt will work closely with the Commonwealth DPP on.
Do you think, though, there's a chance that they were looking at the chances of them being successful? I mean, I'm looking at that recent bank breach report that ASIC put out, and I spoke to James Shipton about it. Now, 5 years to report a significant breach to rectify it, an average of 5 years, the banks. It turns out that actually it's pretty impossible to criminally charge, because the standard of proof of what is a significant breach is too subjective. Now, have we got the regulations right, the law right?
Well, Commissioner Hayne would indicate that the laws are there, they just need to be properly enforced. And while you can't legislate morality, what you can do is properly and effectively enforce the laws that we do have. And I know that James Shipton and ASIC are currently looking at their internal processes and the management of these cases, and Daniel Crennan, who we have appointed as effectively a special prosecutor within ASIC, Daniel Crennan QC, will have primary responsibility for this internal review and improving the practices when it comes to taking enforcement action.
what about the carve-up between the regulators? Because it seemed before that APRA was in charge of the prudential side. Now the government has given APRA responsibility for BEAR, the Bank Executive Accounting regulation. Professor Alan Fels says the government might need an Inspector General like it's got for the ATO to supervise ASIC and APRA because the government really lacks expertise in this space. Would you look at that?
Oh, look, there are a lot of ideas that are swirling around. Let's wait and see what the final recommendations from the Commissioner look like when we expect them in February of next year. But quite clearly we have regulators whose job it is to hold people to account. And if you're not holding people to account, then you can't create that culture, Ticky, of compliance, which has obviously been lacking. It's
very tricky, though, because on the other hand, you've got the possibility that if you go too hard, you might undermine your banking system. You're watching rate rises, presumably in the US. You're watching the wholesale funding situation.
Well, certainly we are when it comes to out-of-cycle rate rises, and you know, a number of the banks did recently move in that direction, and we said it was incumbent on them to explain to their own customers as to why that was the case, because we're not happy when rates rise in that respect. But when it comes to the future regulatory structure, when it comes to the responses to the Royal Commission, let's just wait and see for their final report.
So, Treasurer, when you look at those Labor attack ads on the Prime Minister at the moment, again and again refusing to look at a Royal Commission, you've got an election coming. From the banking community side, there's a worry that there might be quite a lot of brinkmanship leading to a government needing to appear to be even tougher than Labor might have been, and in a way, as happened in energy, you actually gave Rod Sims more powers than he was even asking for to break up the gentailers. Is there a worry that you might go too far and actually risk the financial system?
Well, Ticky, this report made it very clear that the banks were putting profits before people, that there was greed as the prime motive here, that the focus was on selling products and services, and that we need to get back to producing products and services that are fit for purpose, that they need to be delivered with reasonable care and skill, and that those who are practicing in the financial sector need to obey the law and not mislead or deceive. That's what Commissioner Hayne has said. So we'll do everything that is necessary to restore the public's trust and confidence in the financial sector, which is such a strong and vital part of our economy. But I too am conscious that in implementing the recommendations out of the Royal Commission next year, we need to pay particular focus to ensuring that credit continues to be provided in a cost-effective way to businesses and to households, and that we preserve competition, because competition is good for consumers.
All right. Just moving to the final budget numbers that you put out the other day. Very good set. You've got strong commodities and jobs numbers. Any chance that this MYEFO, this mid-year outlook, will turn into a mini budget, do we think, in December?
Oh, look, the MYEFO will come out as expected and as is traditionally the case in December, after the December national accounts numbers. But you're right to point to the strong economic performance. We had national accounts which showed that the economy was growing at 3.4% through the year, which is faster than any time since the height of the mining boom in 2012. We had S&P reaffirm our AAA credit rating, and now we've had the smallest budget deficit in a decade.
So you've got the revenue coming in. Can you clear up for me, Treasurer, the rules on government revenues and budget spending, which, as I understand it, was as far as possible being matched? The Prime Minister seemed to indicate that there were exceptions and that he would have discretion. Well, Chris Bowen from Shadow Treasurer has come out today to say the new Prime Minister has confirmed the Liberals' fiscal and budget repair strategy is completely meaningless, and while fiscal rules remain, they're there to be broken.
Well, I wouldn't pay too much attention to a Chris Bowen press release. That will be fish and chip wrapper tomorrow. I mean, the Labor Party talking about budget surpluses. I mean, the last one they delivered was in 1989 when the Berlin Wall was still standing. So,
well, they promised bigger surpluses, but bigger taxes, bigger spending.
Well, this is not the comedy show. This is a real-life discussion about the economy, and those sort of promises from Labor are not worth the paper that they're written on. I mean, the reality is we have put in place budget rules where new spending is offset by savings, where ministers are expected to bring that to the table. Our rules have not changed, but as the Prime Minister said on the Insiders program on Sunday, there continues to be some discretion there. But the real focus for us is on fiscal discipline.
Okay.
Our rules have not changed, and our fiscal discipline has produced the good numbers that we've got at the moment.
Finally, can I just move to the area of foreign investment, because the Treasurer does have a role there sometimes. Now, we've got APA, this enormous pipeline company, under offer from CKI, the Hong Kong company. That FIRB is considering that. Now, if FIRB give this deal the green light, would you knock this back? I mean, as a former energy minister, would you knock this back on the basis of national interest, given quite how much sight you have on the whole of the energy sector if you own APA?
Well, look, I'm not going to comment on the specifics of particular deals that may be going through that process. But what I will say is that foreign investment has served Australia very well. We do have a savings gap when it comes to the infrastructure needs, and we would never have developed the Pilbara or the North West Shelf, or indeed a few golf courses across the Sunshine or Gold Coasts without foreign investment. But what we do need is to continue to put all such proposals through a strict national interest test. The public would expect that of us, and that is what governments of both political persuasions have done in the past and will continue to do so in the future.
And so finally, do you have a specific public interest test which is related to Chinese investment as opposed to other foreign investment at the moment, given Huawei and various other?
We have a broad national interest test, and it doesn't matter from which country or from which organisation the proposals come. They go through the same national interest test.
Josh Frydenberg, Treasurer, thank you very much for coming on the show and the first day of your money. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Always good to join you, and happy to do so in the future too.
Good on you. Thank you, Treasurer. Well, after the break, decompressing the aftermath following the Hayne interim report with Your Money business reporter Leo Shanahan and the Australian's Ben Butler.
Now, back to Ticky.
Welcome back. Well, let's drill down a little more on the Royal Commission and what the Treasurer has just had to say about it all. Joining me is Your Money business reporter Leo Shanahan and the Australian's business reporter Ben Butler, who also joins us live from Melbourne. Fellas, welcome. Now,
Ticky.
Leo, you were listening in there.
Yeah.
What did you think of what the Treasurer had to say?
Well, look, I
Particularly the Royal Commission, yeah.
I don't think it's a bad line. What I think is the headline point he's trying to make is this is a tougher regulator. He's not scared to go the regulators in this, and as both a new Treasurer and a new, ostensibly a new faces to this regulator, he's going to say this is a tougher, harder cop on the beat in ASIC under my image. I think this is... It's not a bad argument, but it does have pitfalls in the sense that a lot of the same people are still there, and he also risks really hanging them out to dry a bit too much in the sense that people will turn around and say, well, hold on, you're responsible for funding them. They've had to have funding cuts under your government successively, as well as...
they had cuts at the budget, now they're throwing more in, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I don't think this argument... He also sets himself up a bit for failure if this, this rolling series of prosecutions don't actually eventuate.
Well,
and Labor have a good political argument there, which is, well, you've been responsible for their funding, as well as ultimately in managing how they go about things. If you want to take responsibility for the regulator in political sense, go for it, but it's full of traps.
So, Ben, this attack ad this attack ad that Labor's put out, which is this repeat of the Prime Minister saying, no, we don't need a Royal Commission, we don't need a Royal Commission, we don't need a Royal Commission. What do you think the government thinking there now is? That they have to go even harder than what Labor would in terms of Hayne?
Well, it's very difficult to understand, really picking up on what Leo's saying, what the government's position is. They seem to be having their lunch and eating at the same time. On the one hand, they're saying, oh well, we've got the tough cop on the beat, which is actually the argument they were making a couple of years ago when they were saying there's no need for a Royal Commission. But this time it's for real. They've been cutting funding for years. They've restored some of that funding, and there is a new industry funding model which is designed to free up ASIC from the constraints of the budget process to some degree.
Which actually Greg Medcraft fought for a long time, didn't he?
That's right, and that's the other issue here, is that there's the implied criticism here is of Greg Medcraft's reign, and I'm not Greg's biggest cheerleader, but it's not entirely fair given that he did campaign for reversal of the funding cuts and the industry funding model, and he did campaign consistently for higher penalties for wrongdoing in the sector.
Exactly. So, Ben, that breach report that came out with this shocking ASIC report, 10 days ago, where clearly the banks took, years to remedy failings of identify breaches and finally remedy customers. As I was saying before, there seems to be a real problem with the law there, trying to get anything criminally over the line. I mean, this is the legislation. You could argue that ASIC should have screamed earlier, but it's the legislation. It's not ASIC that's at fault here.
Well, there's two issues there, I think. The first is that, yes, there's a problem with the legislation, which is that it's up to the banks to decide whether it's a serious breach or a significant breach, and therefore needs to be reported within 10 days. And the clock only starts ticking once they decide that. So you're kind of like in their hands on that level, and that's a legal problem. But there is, on the other hand, there is a legitimate criticism of ASIC to be made, that they have not been aggressive enough in a lot of cases in dealing with the banks and financial institutions about making them conform to the existing law, which is a point that Kenneth Hayne has made in his interim report, is that the answer may not always be to change the law, but to enforce the existing laws.
Right.
Well, this is the point they want to make with Daniel Crennan QC in this new role, because his job will be the enforcement officer. He's going to be a deputy chair, and they're going to hope that, with this review, see a series of prosecutions and law changes that can actually help those prosecutions. But you have to ask, if that doesn't happen, both ASIC and the government end up looking a bit silly.
Yeah, and the idea that Alan Fells had, which was to put in some special fellow over the top, as the ATO has, who would have the, the wherewithal to actually call the regulators to account.
I don't know if this kind of super regulator idea is really. I mean, do we install someone else above him when he doesn't do his job properly? I mean, we have this system where we just decide to build other regulators on top of each other.
Well, Ben, actually, you wrote an article about with Michael Rodden there about the super side of things, and actually that the government has been out back in 2015. I think it called for some sort of order and regulation of super, but that report already also turned up on Friday in the Quiet, did it?
Yes, that's right. It sort of just magically appeared on the Treasury website. The government's response to the capability review, which was done a couple of years ago, and ASIC's response to the government's response to that. And they've essentially said, oh, well, no, you don't have to take as close a look at superannuation, and gotten rid of the idea that the minister responsible for ASIC would report to the Parliament every year on its performance, which would be a visible, piece of feedback, a metric that would be right out there in the public domain.
So, Leo, going forward, of course, we've got the final recommendations that Kenneth Hayne is going to bring down. That's not until February. In the meantime, we've got several more sessions to go, haven't we?
Yeah, we've got several more sessions. And we've also got reports on the super session as well, mind you, which haven't come out yet. And so the insurance session.
So that'll come out separately, or do you think it'll all come in the final?
My understanding is that they come out in the final. Ben might be able to help me. The timing of this isn't entirely clear. But the point is that both super and insurance found significant failings, and I think as well as APRA. You mentioned APRA earlier tonight in your intro, and I think the failings of APRA became more apparent in the super hearings because of this massive gap in regulatory failure, because people just weren't sure who was responsible, and the APRA inaction was exposed, I think, pretty badly.
Okay, APRA, Ben, where do we sit on APRA? And because, so I say, I always used to think of it as a sort of big brother, the prudential regulator, making sure that the banks were safe, not necessarily the customers were safe, that the banks were safe. But it turns out, no, very much so, that it's all connected, obviously.
Well, that's right. And Haynes' criticism of APRA in the interim report is, well, you knew that CBA was which is the example that he uses, was very bad for a long time, and it's only August last year that we get a proper prudential inquiry into CBA, and you've accepted an enforceable undertaking. There's no legal action. APRA has never taken anyone to court for breaches ever.
No, as was pointed out.
We learned in the superannuation round that included an instance where Colonial, a CBA subsidiary, admitted to breaking the law, the criminal law, 15,000 times. So
well, exactly. So, all right. Well, it's a pox on all your houses when it comes to APRA and ASIC from the Commissioner's point of view, at the moment. But Ben Butler and Leo Shanahan, thank you very much for joining us. And look, that's all for the show tonight. Tomorrow night, talking superannuation with Industry Super's Chief Economist Stephen Anthony. Until then, thanks for your company.